Chapter 15, Prevent. Solve the problem before it happens. In 1977, Ali Mao Malin was a hospital cook working in Mursa, Somalia. When cases of smallpox broke out, he offered to serve as a guide to local officials who were transporting two afflicted children to an isolation camp. Malin knew that he should get vaccinated before traveling with the highly contagious children, but the injection looked painful. Besides, he reasoned, the journey just lasted 10 minutes. Surely he wouldn't be in contact with the children for long enough to get infected. By the time he began to display symptoms, he had come in contact with many members of his family, friends, and neighbors. What followed was an intense 2-week effort led by the World Health Organization's eradication team to vaccinate 54,777 people in the area to ensure the virus would spread no further. Efforts that could have been avoided had Malin received a single injection. There's a happy ending to the story. This narrowly avoided public health disaster was really the last chapter in the most successful health intervention in history, a multi-year campaign to eradicate smallpox. On April 17, 1978, the WHO's Nairobi office sent a simple message via telegram. Search complete, no cases discovered. Ali Mao Malin is the world's last known smallpox case. As a result of health officials' coordinated efforts to vaccinate large swaths of the world's population, a disease that killed 300 million people in the 20th century had now been contained to laboratories. We might not think of prevention as the most obvious way to achieve residual results, but what else can you call it when a single intervention saves an incalculable number of future lives and solves a centuries-long problem once and for all? The long tail of time management. John opened a desk drawer to take out a pen. When the drawer stubbornly refused to shut, he went through his usual dance, opening it as far as it would go, shaking it, closing and opening it again, and moving things around. This went on for a while. Intrigued, his colleague Dean Acheson, a mentor of productivity guru David Allen, asked what was going on. It turned out that a pencil tray was in the way. How long had it been a problem, Dean wanted to know. 2 years, John replied. For 2 years, I have been bothered by that every single day. How long would it take to solve it? 2 minutes. John solved it right then. Why do so many of us put up with problems, big and small, for so much longer than we have to? Because on any given day, it usually takes less time to manage a problem than to solve it. In John's case, while 30 seconds of jostling was annoying, it still took less time than dislodging the tray and resolving the problem. But looking at the equation from a longer-term perspective changes our calculation. Once we add up the cumulative costs of the time and frustration from today, plus tomorrow, plus hundreds of tomorrows after that, suddenly it makes sense to invest in solving the problem once and for all. Using that time frame, fixing that drawer was an absolute bargain. 2 minutes worth of effort to prevent hundreds of future frustrations, an impressive time rebate. This is what I call the long tail of time management. When we invest our time in actions with a long tail, we continue to reap the benefits over a long period. Sometimes we get so used to the little irritations, like a pencil tray lodged in a desk drawer, it doesn't even occur to us to do anything about them. Even if we are bothered by them and we complain about them, we still don't really see them as problems worth fixing. But what we often fail to recognize is that some tasks that seem not worth it in the moment may save us 100 times the time and aggravation over the long run. To break this habit, ask yourself, what is a problem that irritates me repeatedly? What is the total cost of managing that over several years? What is the next step I can take immediately in a few minutes to move towards solving it? The goal is to find the most annoying thing that can be solved in the least amount of time. Once you start asking these questions, you'll start noticing the small actions you can take to make your life easier in the future. For example, I once had a client who was chronically late to meetings. She knew that each time it happened, it was hurting her reputation and credibility. And anytime she saw an important meeting on her calendar, she experienced acute anxiety. Ironically, she was so consumed with worry about being late again, she would lose track of time and her worst fear would be realized. Finally, she found a way to prevent the problem before it happened. Each night she spent 2 minutes reviewing the next day's calendar and setting up a reminder to pop up 5 minutes before each meeting. Simply knowing the reminders were set eased her anxiety, and she soon shed her reputation among colleagues as the one who is always late. The surprising power of striking at the root. Henry David Thoreau once wrote, "There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root." When we're merely managing a problem, we're hacking at the branches. To prevent the problem before it ever arises, we should strike at the root. If you spend a lot of time hacking at the branches, you may have become good at it. But if that is all you are doing, the problem will keep coming back to haunt you. It is merely being managed, never solved. Are there any recurring problems or frustrations in your life or work? Rather than simply hacking at the branches, try striking at the root. For example, a doctor treats a heart problem through years of medication, followed by highly invasive surgery. Strike at the root. A doctor encourages patients to eat right, exercise, and schedule regular checkups. An employee apologizes for completing a project late, repeatedly to multiple parties. An employee improves their process so the project is due on time. An educator constantly complains about students not paying attention in class. An educator signs a social contract with parents and students regarding expectations before the year begins. A student is exhausted from always pulling all-nighters before an assignment is due. A student spends 60 seconds blocking off time to work on assignments every day for a week before they are due. A parent bemoans having to tidy up after their children every day. A parent reinforces a positive habit around tidying up. It's never too early to sound the alarm. Suddenly, Mary's heart stopped, and her nurse immediately triggered a code blue. She had come to the hospital for routine knee replacement surgery and was in fairly good health. Now her crash cart team was racing to the operating room to save her life. Thanks to their fast response, Mary became one of the luckiest 15% of patients who survive a code blue event. After the dust settled, Mary's nurse was horrified to realize, in retrospect, that she had missed some warning signs. About 6 hours before the cardiac event, Mary's speech and breathing had become slightly labored, but because her vital signs were normal, the nurse wasn't concerned. 2 hours later, Mary's oxygen had dipped a little, and she told her nurse she was feeling a little tired. The nurse decided not to call a physician because she didn't want to raise a false alarm. Research shows that patients often display subtle warning signs 6 to 8 hours before a heart attack, but hospital staff members often wait to see more evidence of a serious issue before bringing these small problems to the attention of doctors. Meanwhile, the window of opportunity to prevent a crisis is closing. Several years ago, Australian hospitals came up with a system to take advantage of that window of opportunity and identify potential cardiac arrests before they happen. They created specialized rapid response teams, RRTs, that included a critical care nurse, a respiratory therapist, and a physician or physician's assistant. And in all units, they posted listed triggers that might signal a cardiac arrest, along with thresholds for action. For example, the nurse must call the RRT if a patient's heart rate falls below 40 beats per minute or rises above 130 beats per minute, even if their vital signs appear normal. This system was soon adopted by some hospitals in the United States and has resulted in a 71% reduction in code blues and an 18% reduction in deaths. And the physician explained why RRTs proved successful. The key to this process is time. The sooner you identify a problem, the more likely you are to avert a dangerous situation. Just as you can find small actions to make your life easier in the future, you can look for small actions that will prevent your life from becoming more complicated. This principle applies in every type of endeavor. Measure twice, cut once. In 2014, the French satirical newspaper Le Canard Enchaîné noticed an odd occurrence at railway stations in France. The train platforms seemed to be getting smaller, and nobody seemed to know why. The newspaper contacted SNCF, the country's state-owned railway company, to inquire, but company spokespeople were tight-lipped, so the reporters kept digging. Finally, this story came out. Earlier that year, as part of their efforts to modernize France's rail system, SNCF had spent $20 billion on a new fleet of 2,000 trains. The French prided themselves on these modern state-of-the-art machines. The fact that they were built in France rather than imported from another country mattered to them. There was only one problem. A full quarter of the platforms in France were 8 inches too wide for the trains to enter the station. When Mckeown and Mckeown uncovered the scale of the error and broke the story, SNCF had already quietly shaved 8 inches off the edges of 300 platforms, but 1,000 remained. The final cost to French taxpayers, $65 million. An NPR reporter asked the question on everyone's mind when he interviewed a Mckeown and Mckeown columnist. How could the SNCF, a national railroad that's been operating since 1938, do something so dumb as buy trains that don't fit in so many of its stations? At first the answer wasn't clear. Then the blame storming began. The French transport minister called the mistake a comic drama and pointed to the previous administration for its decision to split the national train company SNCF and the national rail operator RFF into 2 separate state-run entities. Eventually the problem was traced back to a simple and preventable error. RFF, which had given SNCF the dimensions, had measured only platforms built less than 30 years ago, assuming these were representative of all platforms. What they failed to take into account was the fact that many of France's regional platforms had been built more than 50 years ago, when trains were narrower. A spokeswoman for the RFF unhelpfully commented, "It's as if you have bought a Ferrari that you want to park in your garage, and you realize that your garage isn't exactly the right size to fit a Ferrari because you didn't have a Ferrari before." Unfortunately, confirmed another spokesperson, they had discovered the problem a bit late. Indeed, one small assumption goes unverified. A train gets built and then purchased 2,000 times. It's the kind of mistake we've all made, albeit on a significantly smaller scale. This lesson is one that many of us learned doing arts and crafts as children. Measure twice and cut once. Often, measuring something just once, or not at all, produces first-order consequences. The consequences are the direct and immediate results of our actions. In this case, the RFF made a faulty assumption about the uniformity of French station platforms, and as a result, conveyed inaccurate measurements. But the chain of consequences, of course, didn't stop there. In an interrelated world, a single action can have second-order and third-order consequences. In this case, the inaccurate measurements resulted in the trains being too wide, which resulted in the need for major construction work across 300 stations, which resulted in a $65 million government expenditure, money that could have otherwise been allocated to schools or hospitals or homeless shelters. Mistakes are dominoes. They have a cascading effect. When we strike at the root by catching our mistakes before they could do any damage, we don't just prevent the first domino from toppling, we prevent the entire chain reaction. Mistakes are dominoes. They have a cascading effect. When we strike at the root by catching our mistakes before they can do any damage, we don't just prevent that first domino from toppling, we prevent the entire chain reaction.